All right, let's go ahead and talk a little bit right now about the Byzantines and the rise of Russia in Eastern Europe. So really, we're moving on from the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire, Western Empire in particular, collapses around Rome, and the Byzantines rise up, centered around Constantinople. Constantinople had been made a great city by the Roman Emperor Constantine, and when Western Rome falls, Constantinople naturally takes over as the next logical center and the next capital, the next major city. It was aided by this by its location. Actually right on the border between Asia and Europe, and it's located on a body of water called the Bosporus Strait, which connects the Aegean to the Black Sea. And so there's a lot of trade that goes between Central Asia and the Mediterranean world that naturally flows through there. And that's one of the things that really makes Constantinople thrive and makes it into the city that becomes the capital of the Byzantine Empire. Interestingly enough, the reason it's called the Byzantine Empire is because before it was called Constantinople, before Emperor Constantine renamed it, it was called Byzantium. And that name is the one that kind of stuck with the empire, even though the city itself was changed to Constantinople. Of course, then when the Muslims came through, the Ottoman Turks, they renamed the city yet again to its modern name, Istanbul, which literally translates as Islam in abundance. And so again, the Byzantine Empire, when you're talking about what exactly it is, it's really the eastern portion of the old Roman Empire, just kind of revamped and revitalized. The most successful ruler to note here is really the guy Justinian. Justinian is successful for a number of reasons, but probably one of the biggest reasons he's successful are the people that he surrounds himself with. He really makes some excellent choices. The first is his wife, Theodora. Theodora starts off really as an actress. It was kind of unusual. Ordinarily, the folks who were at the level of Justinian would go ahead and look for a princess or somebody else in the nobility to go ahead and marry. But Theodora was an actress, and her father owned a circus, and Justinian became smitten with her, and he makes a good choice and picks her as his wife because she's a pretty smart lady and pretty ambitious, and she understood politics quite a bit, actually. Probably the most notable example of this would be when the Nika revolt happens. Justinian is getting ready to forfeit the city, getting ready to flee the city, and it's Theodora who really encourages him to stay and to fight and ultimately to prevail against this revolt, to remove him. And so really, that's kind of a pivotal point. And without Theodora, I think there probably is not any Justinian. She also goes ahead and really greatly influences him in regards to the laws about women in the Byzantine Empire. They really go ahead and give women a lot more rights to keep their children if their husband dies, rights to property and different things like that. And so that's really a huge thing that really defines the Byzantines. It separates them apart from a lot of other empires of the day. Another thing that Theodora brings to the table is her sister ends up marrying a guy by the name of Belisarius. Belisarius becomes the most successful general under Justinian, and really actually earns Justinian's trust, again, during the Nika revolt. Belisarius had been in charge of the personal bodyguard to the emperor, and he in large part, along with the emperor's bodyguard, is responsible for defeating the rebels in the Nika revolt. He's also married to Theodora's sister, and he will be the general who Justinian puts in charge of going out and trying to reconquer much of what had been the Western Roman Empire. And in fact, under Justinian, the Byzantine Empire really grows to its largest expanse, and he really does. Belisarius, under the direction of Justinian, conquers much of the old Roman Empire, all the way back to Spain, across northern Africa, into Italy. They don't quite reconquer Spain, but they get right up to it, all through northern Africa there, and they get all through Italy. So really, they are successful in exerting control over much of the old Roman Empire. From architecturally and from an art standpoint and from a religious standpoint, probably one of the most significant achievements during Justinian's reign comes in the form of the Hagia Sophia. The Hagia Sophia is a historical landmark that you can still find in Istanbul today, but it was originally built as a cathedral for the Eastern Orthodox Church, and it was revolutionary for its time. It's really the first example of architects figuring out how to put a round dome on a square building. And so it's really kind of revolutionary for its time period and remains kind of one of those significant achievements in architecture throughout history that we still can go back and look at today. It was also hugely important for religious purposes. Like I said, it was the center of the Eastern Orthodox Church. The Patriarch of Constantinople was based out of there, which would be the equivalent of the Pope in Rome. And once the Muslims took over, they go ahead and they repurpose the Hagia Sophia. They make it into a mosque, and it becomes the central mosque there in Istanbul. And then once the modern Turkish government takes over, they turn it into a national historical site and a museum. It's not used anymore as either a church or a mosque. So it's really, the Hagia Sophia has played a hugely significant role in the life of that part of the world, really for the past 500 years or so, or even more. And so a hugely significant achievement under the reign of Justinian. Another big thing that Justinian does is he preserves Roman law. He goes back and he starts writing down all this stuff that the Romans had developed about how to govern. And he puts it into a book. It's called the Corpus Juris Civilis. There's actually 4 parts to this. It's called the Code, the Digest, the Institutes, and the Novels. And collectively, they are really all of Roman law, minus the old pagan religious part of Roman law. And it really serves as a basis for a lot of law that develops in Europe. And it's really one way that the old Greco-Roman way of life, the old values and principles and way of doing things that had been evidenced in Rome and in Greece was preserved for really Western society. Because really, Western society as we understand it today is still very much influenced by Greco-Roman values. In other words, values that are from Greece, values that trace their origins back to Rome. And really, much of what we call Christendom today, Christendom, the area that is predominantly Christian today, is sometimes referred to as Christendom, is really traces its roots right back to the Greco-Roman world. And that's in large part due to Justinian and the Byzantines, and how they go ahead and preserve Roman law and some of the different Roman ways of governing and the ways of doing things. The church is also hugely influential. It's hard to understand the Byzantines without understanding the church. And the beginnings of that understanding is when the Byzantine Empire begins, there's really one Christian church, and it's governed by several, if you want to call them bishops, or they're called patriarchs, but these were the older guys in the church who really wielded a fair amount of power, a lot of power. They would get together from time to time and have the Council of Nicaea, the Council of Trent, different things like that, to discuss theology and doctrine of the church. And so at the beginning, it's all one church. But what ends up happening is the patriarch in Rome starts to become the Pope, and the patriarch in Constantinople said, like, well, I don't agree with everything you're doing. And in particular, one of the big early disagreements is over the use of icons or pictures. In Rome, they felt like, look, we've got to have pictures because most people in Western Europe can't read or write, so we got to find a way to tell them about Jesus Christ, about the gospel. And so we need to have those pictures. But in the East, in the Byzantines, which was a little more advanced, they felt like what we were doing was devolving into idol worship. We were worshiping the pictures, we were worshiping the statues, not actually God. And so in the East, the Patriarch of Constantinople says, look, using icons in worship is against church doctrine, against church teaching. So it's in other words, it's a heresy. Things for which you can be kicked out of the church. And the guy in Rome's like, you can't kick me out of the church. I'm a patriarch myself. And so they go ahead and they have this disagreement. And that's one of the big things that leads to what becomes known as the Great Schism, the breaking apart of the Roman Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church, which are still separate strains and separate branches of Christianity today. Militarily, the Byzantines are also hugely significant and powerful. One of the big things they introduce is there's a ton of new technology that they bring to the fore. Probably the biggest advantage they have is on the seas in the Mediterranean. Their navy reigns supreme because of a secret weapon they had, and it was called Greek fire. Probably the best analogy I can make might be kind of like napalm today. We don't really know what it was. They were so good at guarding their secret, probably one of the only governments in history that actually was really successful at guarding secrets. In fact, so successful that we don't know what it is today. No, they never told. And the secret of Greek fire kind of died with them. Although we have guesses about what it was, we don't know for sure what the formula was. But it was a liquid that they could actually spray out onto other ships to set them on fire. And it made their navy next to invincible. There was just nothing that could compete with it out on the sea at the time. And so Greek fire was an incredibly important weapon for the Byzantines' domination of trade in the Mediterranean world during their time. They also go ahead and develop better use of swords and better armor for their military, which makes them very formidable. And this goes ahead and goes a long way towards their military prowess. Their economy was really based off of trade. Again, trade between the north and the south through the Bosporus Straits, from Scandinavia all the way down to Africa, reaching back over into what we today would call the Middle East or the Arab world. And so they're kind of a center of it all. And really Istanbul today, again, sitting on the boundary between Europe and Asia, is a hugely important trading city where a ton of business goes through that location. And it's really just a beneficiary of geography. From this huge amount of trade, they're able to go ahead and extract enormous tax revenue. And this is what they use to run their bureaucracy and run their military, and also to further bolster their economy. Unfortunately, what ends up happening with the decline is that the patriarch of the Eastern Orthodox Church feels threatened as Islam is expanding. They are taking away territory from the Byzantines. They conquer Jerusalem, they conquer Syria, and he asks, the Byzantine patriarch asks the Pope for help. And the Pope in Rome says, okay, so he calls on the nations of Western Europe to rise up, and this becomes known as the Crusades. And there's several crusades to go ahead and attempt to take land back that the Muslims had conquered from the Christian Byzantines. And the last of the Crusades, or one of the last of the Crusades, the Byzantines, they promised to go ahead and help pay, and they kind of back out on that, and a lot of the Crusaders get upset about that, and so they just turn and they sack Constantinople. And for a time, they bring it into the Byzantine Empire. The Byzantines are able to re-exert themselves after a few decades, but they never really returned to their former glory until about 200 years after the Crusaders sack Constantinople. It ends up falling for the last time to the Ottoman Turks. Again, a Muslim empire coming out of Asia Minor, out of Turkey. They go ahead and conquer Constantinople, and they are the ones who rename it Istanbul, or Islam in abundance. So after the Byzantines fall, at the same time the Byzantines are kind of in decline, Constantinople falls for the last time in 1453. In the meantime, up to the north of the Black Sea, Russia is ascendant. Russia is rising. And so Russia's rising for a couple of reasons. Again, a lot of it gets down to location. Originally, the people who today ethnically we would call them Russian, they're originally Slavic peoples, and they settle in a large plain called a steppe in between the Carpathian Mountains and the Ural Mountains, just to the north of the North Sea. Today you'd call it Ukraine, Belarus, also Russia. Moscow would be in this area in between the Ural and the Carpathian Mountains. So again, this is where the ethnicity of Russian begins. And in large part, it's because, again, of trade. You had the Scandinavians to the north. They could come down rivers like the Vistula, the Neman, the Divna, the Dniester, the Dnieper River, and they could go ahead and they could come down these rivers, and then they could trade their goods with the Byzantines in the south, and then the Russians could go ahead and make money off of that trade. They were kind of like the middlemen between the Byzantines in the south and the Vikings in the north. And this is really what begins what we would call Russia today. The first, I guess, the first version of Russia, Russia 1.0, is Kievan Russia. It begins actually with a guy by the name of Rurik. He founds the Rus, which most people think is probably where the term Russian comes from. He was the leader, he founds a dynasty called the Rus dynasty, and it's out of a city called Novgorod. And it's during this time, during the Rus dynasty, that Kiev really becomes a major trade center. Kiev becomes the wealthiest of all the cities in the Rus that are governed by the Rus, and so Kiev really comes to the fore, and that's why it's called Kiev in Russia, because the prince of Kiev was usually the most powerful of the princes during this time period. One of the princes who really goes ahead and exerts himself is the guy by the name of Vladimir I. And his big influence is he is the guy who's responsible for reaching out to the Byzantines and converting to Christianity. It's kind of a strange little story. Christianity had been in Russia for a while. There had been missionaries that go there, but it hadn't become a dominant force until this guy Vladimir I. He decides, I guess, that the Russians need some churching up, and so he sends emissaries all over to go find out which church he wants to belong to. He goes down to the Muslim world and decides, I don't think I really want to be Muslim. Some people speculate that it was because Muslims didn't drink and he wasn't willing to give up his vodka, or give up his alcohol. The Roman Catholic Church he looks at, and his emissaries aren't terribly impressed. But the Byzantines he's very impressed with. They go down, in particular, Hagia Sophia. They go down, they see this church, they're like, it is awesome. On top of that, again, the Byzantines are major trading partners with the Rus, with the Russians. And he wants to get in good with the Byzantine emperor. And he sees that the Byzantine emperor has a sister, her name's Anna, and he wants to go ahead and marry her. So he's like, hey, this would be a good way for me to get in good with Anna if I go ahead and convert to Christianity and we go with the same type of Christianity that they practice in the Byzantine Empire. This could help me out, and it does. So he converts to Christianity, in some part for political reasons, and in large part for political reasons. And then he goes ahead and puts the people in charge, the bishops in charge, whatever you want to call them, the patriarchs of Russia, if you will, and he calls them metropolitans, or they're called metropolitans. So metropolitans would be like your church patriarchs in Russia. They're the leaders of the Russian Orthodox Church. A little later, another guy, actually not too much later, so about 40 years later or so, Yaroslav the Wise, again, one of the more notable leaders to come out of Kiev in Russia, goes ahead and takes over. And he establishes a Russian law code, the Pravda Ruskaya, and he reigns from 1019 to 1054. Then the Mongols come in. They invade from about 1237 to 1240. In 3 years, they basically pillage and burn every town in Russia. They're under the leader of a guy by the name of Batu, and they maintain that control. They basically control Russia for about the next 200 years until about 1480. And then finally, the Mongols are kicked out by Ivan the Great. This is what we think of as Russia today. This is the beginning of that. He is the Grand Prince of Moscow. He's Grand Prince from 1462 to 1505, so a little over 40 years. And he's the guy who says, you know what, we can be our own thing. We don't need the Mongols, and they can't do anything about it. So he throws off the Mongols and unites Russia, and now we have united Russia. Now they haven't pushed all the way east of the Ural Mountains yet. That happens with Ivan the Great's grandson, Ivan the Terrible, Ivan the Fourth. He's the guy who really pushes and expands Russia to the east, all across Siberia, and to the south, to the Caspian Sea. Why does Russia look like it does today? In large part, that's the empire that was created by Ivan the Terrible. I think we here in the West, in the modern West, sometimes misunderstand his nickname. We think Ivan the Terrible means that they think he's bad. The original understanding of terrible wasn't bad. It was more like formidable. Ivan the Strong. Although he was a little bit off of his rocker, or at least most people think he is. He's the first guy who actually takes the title of Tsar. You'll see it spelled C-Z-A-R. That's because it goes back to Caesar. You'll also see it spelled T-S-A-R, Tsar, because it's pronounced with that kind of T sound. But he had a notoriously violent temper. In fact, he killed his own son, the heir to the throne. As the story goes, the son's wife, his son also Ivan, showed up to a function, and he felt that she was clothed inappropriately, and he hit her and he knocked her over. Well, she was pregnant and she had a miscarriage. Well, Ivan's son is furious at this, goes to confront his father. He and his father break into a fist fight, and his father hits him with his scepter, which was pointed, and ends up killing him. Some people will say he murdered him or whatever. It was an argument, and it turned violent, and he struck his son and killed him. You can also see it in his dealing with Novgorod, which he suspected some of the boyars there were plotting against him. He had a pretty tense relationship with them. Ivan actually doesn't take the throne until 1547. At 1533, Ivan's only 3 years old when he is appointed the next ruler. And so for a lot of years, the boyars kind of take over. And it starts off, well, actually his mother takes over, and a lot of people speculate the boyars actually killed her. And so Ivan, and then didn't treat Ivan very well. So he didn't have a good relationship with them. And so he actually gets his personal military force, the Oporichniki, and they go and they wipe him out in Novgorod. And it's absolutely brutal. And this is another place where his nickname, Ivan the Terrible, comes from. This brutal way he conquered. his sanity was definitely questionable. He was a little bit off his rocker, but absolutely brilliant, and is really a big reason why Russia is what it is today. Geographically, they're basically the old Mongolian Empire. They stretch from the Pacific all the way to Europe. Culturally, they really owe a lot to the Byzantines and to the especially the Eastern Orthodox Church. So that's a little bit about the Byzantines and the rise of Russia in a very quick nutshell. Thanks a lot.